Hello everyone, it's Moose in here, welcoming you to a new video of mine on my channel, covering something a little bit different. For those of you who don't know, and if you don't know, be sure to check it out, I recently started a Diamond Nuzlocke on my channel, and since I started that, I've seen some very interesting little tidbits of information about Professor Rowan that have led me to make this Pokemon theory for you. And what this Pokemon theory is, and the theory is that Professor Rowan is actually Mr. Pokemon from the Gen 2 games. Now, I don't know if this theory is well known. I tried looking around on the internet for other sort of videos that have been made on the topic. I didn't really find anything. So I think it's pretty interesting, to say the least. I did find a fair bit of evidence when I started to do a little bit of research that does suggest that they are one and the same person. So as far as the structure for this video goes, what I first want to cover is what exactly do we know about Professor Rowan. The first little bit of information that I did pick up was during the events of the game. Dawn mentions after being away for 4 years, you must be excited to be back, which suggests that prior to the events of the game, he was off exploring for 4 years in other regions. And we'll get into what regions they could be in a little while, but that's the first bit of information that I discovered. And so after I worked through that little beginning of the game where they offered a little bit of hint that, Professor Rowan has been to other regions, what could they be? I did start looking into other characters, in the regions that he could have visited and who he could have been in those regions. And then there's this comment by just a sort of team, the team thug, that it's, "Oh, Professor Pokemon, must you be so difficult?" And I found it really interesting that he used that title, Professor Pokemon, as a, title for Professor Rowan, because it's so similar to Mr. Pokemon. Yeah, most Pokemon professors are somewhat Pokemon experts, but I just found it really coincidental that he would use that title. And maybe it's just like a little bit of a hint as to who Professor Rowan has been in the past. It was at this point that I started doing a little bit more web-based research, looking online, a lot of Bulbapedia stuff, I guess you'd say, because they do like good character background kind of stuff. And there's one I come across the Left Center to Study Pokemon of Kanto with Professor Oak. And, that makes sense to me. There are other sources that also say, and I have another one of those, I'll probably just show it right now, that say that they are very familiar with each other. But what do we know about Mr. Pokemon as well is that the first appearance you see him in the games is when you go and you need to collect the egg from him, and Professor Oak is also right there, which suggests that they're also very friendly with each other. Now, I'm not too sold on the validity that those two were really related, but it just does sort of further implement, Professor Rowan and Professor Oak did know each other, they did visit each other, they did study Pokemon with each other, and that Professor Rowan has visited Kanto in the past. Now, before we get on to what I know about Mr. Pokemon and what I've sort of picked up, I want to first cover just, what we know about not Mr. Pokemon, Professor Rowan relates to the timelines. And I want to thank Candy, Evie, and Mr. Buddy. Those are sort of the timelines I looked at, and there seems to be a general consensus for these timelines, at least early on, with relation to, time gaps and where things fit in. So, yeah. The thing to note about these timelines, and what further proves that Professor Rowan could be Mr. Pokemon, is that Rowan's 4-year hiatus prior to the events of Gen 4 suggests that he very well could have visited the regions of Kanto, Johto, and maybe even Hoenn. And where do we find Mr. Pokemon? Well, he's in the Johto region, is where we first meet him. And indeed, Mr. Pokemon is described as a great traveler. And now moving on to what we know about Mr. Pokemon. We know that Mr. Pokemon is actually just a nickname that the games use. His true name is unknown. We know that he has old friends with Professor Oak, and that he keeps in contact with Elm because of his Pokemon evolution knowledge. And what's interesting about that is Professor Elm isn't really as well known for his Pokemon evolution knowledge, more at his sort of Pokemon breeding knowledge, because in the Gen 2 games, that's when breeding is introduced, and Professor Elm is more the Pokemon professor that's very knowledgeable about breeding Pokemon. The professor that is sort of the most knowledgeable about Pokemon evolution is actually Professor Rowan, which makes you think that if Professor Pokemon is using that kind of language and sort of judging professors based on their Pokemon evolution knowledge, maybe they're the same person. Who knows? The last little bit of information that I saw about Mr. Pokemon is that he's been cited by, I think it was Professor Oak, to have had some research or made an attempt to find like Groudon and Kyogre. And again, referring to the timeline, it's not too out of the way to assume that Professor Rowan did at one point go to Hoenn, and while he was there, he might have looked for the legendary Pokemon of the area. So to do a little bit of a recap for this Pokemon theory, I just want to go over sort of what I've covered, my overall evidence as to why I think they're one and the same person. So first of all, we have Professor Rowan's 4-year break in relation to the, well-known sort of a consensus on the Pokemon timeline suggests that Professor Rowan's traveling took him to either Hoenn or Kanto or Johto or all three of them. And Professor Pokemon, known as a really great traveler, known to have, it suggests that he's also been to Hoenn, so that kind of fits in that regard. Secondly, there's also some sort of language hints with Professor Rowan being called Mr. Pokemon. No, Professor Pokemon in the Pokemon Diamond game, which I'm currently playing right now. There may yet be more evidence that I haven't yet discovered, because as I say, I'm still playing through it. But yeah, no, just those little language hints, timeline-wise, and sort of their backstory, their character kind of aligns. So that really led me to believe that they are one and the same person. It made me want to make this theory because it was a really fun idea, and it was one that I hadn't really seen out there as sort of common knowledge. But let me know what you think in the comments. I'd be happy to see what you think, whether you also have evidence sort of that disproves or proves this theory. I'm down for whatever. That's it for this theory. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.